introduce her in a rather, thanks, got it. I'm going to introduce her in a rather unusual way. I looked at freedom from religion as the Freedom from Religion Foundation as a group that we should have the way we had Jewish Social Services, the Catholic Multicultural Center, the imams, et cetera, and like Selena Fox from paganism. However, when I went to meet with Annie Laurie, it was a revelation. We weren't talking about religious issues or non-religious issues. What we were talking about, essentially, is politics that affect all of us women in so many ways. And so I'm going to introduce Annie Laurie with a small biography, but under the auspice of what can one woman do? Get ready, ladies, because this is really amazing. Annie Laurie is a third generation free thinker. She co-founded with her mother while she was in college as a college student at W. Madison. Can you hear my train going by? She co-founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And I'm going to tell you, and she's going to tell you a lot about that, but I also want you to know that she has published a number of books. How about this one? Woe to the Women, The Bible Tells Me So. It was first published in 1981, and it's in its fourth printing. In 1988, her book, Betrayal of Trust, Clergy Abuse of Children, was the first book documenting widespread sexual abuse by the clergy. Her 1997 anthology, Women Without Superstition, No God, No Masters, first collection of the writings of historic and contemporary women freethinkers. When I asked Annie Laurie, what kind of spiritual practices, if any, or what kind of doctrine, if any, the freethinkers considered, she said, and I love it, humanism. Right, Annie Laurie? Yeah, and that did it for me. So I'm going to introduce Annie Laurie and ask her to tell us what her mother did all those years ago while you were in college, Annie Laurie, and how it's changed things for women. Annie Laurie Gaylor, everyone.
Well, hello everyone, and hello my neighbor Nan and some others I recognize. Nice to see you. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a privilege to get to know Pat. And I was just going to talk about how FFRF was founded first. And I understand that if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt, but because this is not going to be a formal talk. The genesis for the Freedom from Religion Foundation was my mother's early work as an abortion rights campaigner to either decriminalize or legalize abortion rights in the 1960s, and also contraceptive rights. You may remember that Wisconsin was the last state in the union to legalize contraception for unmarried people, and that was 1974, and that was through the courts. If we were waiting for our state legislature to do it, we'd still be waiting. But she got involved in abortion rights very early. I think it was 67. She wrote the first editorial in the state of Wisconsin, or really the Midwest, calling for legalizing abortion when she was editor of the Middleton Times Tribune. And after that, her phone never stopped ringing, women calling about where can I go. And she was also active with the Zero Population Growth and started the abortion, contraception, sterilization referral, because it was also very hard to get sterilizations in Wisconsin. And she used to be referring women to Mexico City, for example, and also worked with clergy consultation, who were also referring women to other places. And gradually, Colorado, Hawaii, New York opened up. And then we had an early decision by a 3-judge panel in 1970 that actually legalized abortion in Wisconsin before Roe versus Wade. Although when Dr. Kennan opened a clinic the next year, it was raided. And 300 women's records were taken, and women were arriving, having driven all night, exhausted, crying. And my mother was called in by the clinic to help those women do something. And that was the beginning of the Women's Medical Fund, which is another group that Anne founded. And it's the longest continuously operating abortion fund in the country. It's already helped 970 women this year, all volunteer to this point. And so she was always hands on the ground. She was always on the phone. We used to joke that when she died, we'd say, "Here lies 608-238-3338." She had so many hats on, and they were. She was working from home, and we didn't dare answer the phone the normal way, but we didn't know if they'd be calling about Women's Medical Fund or zero population growth, or then the Freedom from Religion Foundation. But when she was campaigning for legal abortion, and I was following her around the state as a 7th and 8th grader, it became very clear to both of us that the only organized opposition and the only rationale for opposing abortion rights was religious in nature. And it was only organized, whether fundamentalists, Roman Catholic, Mormon, who were opposing women's rights and abortion rights. So that had opened our eyes to the need to keep religion out of government. And we bandied that about throughout my high school years. And as I was going to college, this notion that in our country we have freedom of religion. People talk about freedom of religion, but they do not talk about freedom from religion. And they're really the same thing. You can't have true religious freedom of religion without freedom from religion and government, without the government dictating to you your rights of conscience. And in many languages, of and from is the same word, like in French and Spanish, de. And so we thought it would be useful to promote that. And then an issue came up in Madison where we became aware, when we had to testify before the city council and the county board, that they were having organized prayer. And the city council was bringing in some very conservative Christian pastors even to lead that prayer. So we decided at that point to launch the Freedom from Religion Foundation. That foundation was alliterative. And we thought we would sound a little bit weak as a mother-daughter team, and an elderly gentleman in Milwaukee lent his name so that there were 3 of us. And our little homily to both the city council and the county board got front page attention, and people said, "We want to join you," and we were off. And I was a college student, I was 21. So obviously my mother was the mainstay, and she was always the primary principal founder. And she was asked to go national in 1978, based on a really impressive track record of ending many violations through education and persuasion, and also taking some court cases in those 2 years. And we are now the largest free thought organization in the United States, with over 38,000 current dues-paying members. And we don't keep you on the rolls if you don't pay your dues, unlike the Catholic Church. And our members are free thinkers, which means people who form their opinion about religion based on reason rather than faith, tradition, or authority. We don't have a litmus test to call yourself an atheist, but probably 75% of our members do consider themselves atheists, and others are agnostics, and some don't like to label themselves, and secular humanists, rationalists, you name it. We like to joke that we all disbelieve in the same gods. You don't care what you call yourself. And we do have some liberal religionists among our ranks. We used to have a rabbi who was very elderly, and he has since died. But we do promote free thought. Our 2 purposes are to educate the public about non-theism, and the second purpose, which is our emphasis, to defend the constitutional principle of separation between state and church. And so we went from an all-volunteer group for many years to an organization that we now have about 27 staff members. We bought a building in downtown Madison that in 1990, two-story building, an 1855 building, pre-Civil War. And in 2015, we completed a major expansion of that building. We bought the building next door and added 5 stories. And we have many interesting artifacts in our building, and we haven't really reopened formally to the public since the pandemic, but we do have events for our members in the auditorium. And as I told Pat, we struggle with doing something more open to the public because we have had some very serious death threats, and also some terrible campaigns where they take over our phones, they take over our email. Some guy in Florida who was an ex-Marine who was threatening all the women with rape, that kind of thing. We haven't had any serious incidents since 2016, but we always think, well, we're really glad that our address is kind of hard to find. We constantly purge it from our website. It's an issue that we have struggling with, like short of hiring a full-time security guard, we try to kind of have a low profile. We're hiding in plain sight. And there is a lot of hostility to people like ourselves that is not really well known. And ever since we started, we've been the recipient of what would now be called hate mail and crank mail, mostly by individuals who aren't going after us because we're atheists or agnostics. They're going after us because we're trying to keep religion out of government. It's usually the state church complaints. Why are you trying to take prayer out of school? Or why don't you want the Christian flag to fly above a city hall? You should move to Canada. You should move to, and then every country that is currently on the list of hated countries we're told to move to. And it's always very ironic that they want us to go to an Islamist country that has a theocracy. They don't quite get that we're against theocracies. They just think we're against Christianity. And we're not against Christianity, we're against religion and government. And the primary violators in this country tend to be promoting some form of Christianity. And we have grown, as I said, from all volunteer to now having a team of attorneys, about 10 attorneys, or 11 right now. We have 3 legal fellows who are all women, who are 2-year employees out of law school. And then we have permanent attorneys on staff. And we also were very pleased that we had a full house of our legal interns this summer. We have 6 Carols, and they were all filled, and they were wonderful students. And so we've taken over 90 lawsuits since we began, winning many significant victories for separation of state and church. And we just filed a very interesting lawsuit last week against in state court in South Carolina, where the very rapidly zealous governor there, a Republican governor, had put into the budget $1.5 million to create a Christian school for a group that for 25 years has indoctrinated children in the Bible, which is their right, during release time instruction. No true teachers on staff, no true educational ability. And this was no sunlight, and very, very controversial, I'm glad to say, in South Carolina. So with 4 of our members, including 2 from that county, Greenville County, with one of them who has a child in the schools, we filed suit. And we actually do have a good expectation of winning, because Governor McMaster's during the pandemic had said he was going to give all the COVID federal money that had come in to private schools, e.g. religious schools in South Carolina. And that was sued by some other people. And there was a unanimous decision by the state Supreme Court saying he couldn't do that. So even though I like to say this is the best of times to be a free thinker, because there's never been more of us. It is the worst of times to be in the courts, and that is getting extremely concerning with the takeover, basically the capture of the Supreme Court by Trump, and who was able to appoint a third of the federal judiciary, including, 3 of our members on the Supreme Court. So basically, the Supreme Court has been captured by what we would consider to be Christian nationalists. Even if the Supreme Court justices themselves may not be Christian nationalists, they were put there by the Federalist Society and their supporters. And you've seen the trio of terrible decisions this summer, I'm sure. So it's going to have a very chilling effect, but we are still fighting and using the secular background of our nation to promote separation of church and state. And one of the mantras at the Freedom from Religion Foundation is that America was first among nations, and it was very revolutionary, not to put a deity in our written constitution. It begins, we the people. Sovereignty is invested in we the people, not in a divinity. That had never been done before. And often there was a connection with monarchy as well. And this was a deliberate act by the framers of the Constitution, because they were well aware not only of the horrible religious wars and persecutions and crusades in the old world, but that there was pretty intense persecution in all but one of the original colonies. And many people mistake the pilgrims coming over with the founding of our nation, but of course, 150 years later, it was the framers of our Constitution who founded the United States of America. So that's kind of our mantra. That's what we try to remind our nation. That's why my mother and I started FFRF. We thought it would just take a few years to remind our country of our secular roots and how they should be honored and how they have served our nation so well. There's no religious test for public office. That's in our Constitution. The oath of office for the president is given word for word, and there's no put your hand on the Bible, so help me God. And then, of course, they adopted the Bill of Rights with the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Incorporated under the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, and gradually by the Supreme Court to apply to all state citizens. So something that we should be proud of that unites us. And after January 6th, we produced a decal, and now we have a cap and we have a bumper sticker with the words E pluribus unum, the original motto of the United States, from many come one, which we think is a healing motto that we need to return to. And because keeping religion out of government protects all of us, religious or non-religious. It allows us to live together in harmony. And that's really our goal. And trying to think, what else would you like to know? What else do we talk about, Pat?
Well, we talked about the fact that, you're a national organization. And I just want to stress this again, that your mom, Annie Laurie, and you, but your mom, with her thought process and her dedication to freedom from religion and freedom of religion, one person concerned enough to represent women in every facet. One person did that, and one person started an organization that protected women, and it became a national organization. And that you, Annie Laurie Gaylor, are responsible with your partners, of course, for an incredible organization that protects all of us from having whatever we think, however we think about God, about religion, about anything separate from the laws of the United States. The laws that have been, as we all know, restrictive to women and anybody who doesn't agree, people of every color, restrictive. And your organization has fought against that from the very beginning, but specifically to call out the abuses that organized religions have fostered, on women, on other countries. I can't help but think about what's going on in the Middle East with women burning their headscarves.
Yes, they're so great. Yes.
Somebody arrested by saying these words actually gives me the chills. The morality police. Can you imagine, living under that kind of rule, which is religious rule? And although it's an extreme to us in our culture, there's still that mentality, of course, that religion imposes on
Well,
women.
when the Iranian Revolution occurred, we put out a bumper sticker saying, "Iran, one nation under God." This is what happens when you have theocracy. And yes, those women are so brave, and there's already been more deaths. And the journalist that exposed this 22-year-old dying after detention by the morality police is in detention herself. It's very exhilarating to see the protests, but I'm very concerned about the crackdowns, but it's wonderful to see. And I did want to return to the issue of abortion because, of course, as I told Pat, in some ways, I'm so glad that my mother is not here to see what happened in the state of Wisconsin after that long fight. And, all of us worked hard to get rid of that statute. The legislature wouldn't repeal our 1849 law. And in the 80s, they did finally repeal the part of the law that would put women in prison, because that was part of the law. But they would not repeal the entire law that would put physicians in prison. And, so everybody has to go to Illinois, and the Women's Medical Fund, is still helping so many people. But the concern is, will women know where to go? And when you are poor and low income, and you don't have a car, and you don't have a cell phone, or you don't have childcare, the burden is so much greater. So it's so terribly unfair. And we do see the expectation that possibly by the end of the year, half of our states will have outlawed abortion. And although the Dobbs decision did not reference religion, we must remember that the 6 judges who ruled against Roe versus Wade, saying abortion is no longer a constitutional right, were all raised as Roman Catholics. One of them, Gorsuch, converted to Episcopalianism. And of course, we have another, a sixth Roman Catholic, Sonia Sotomayor, who represents the mainstream of Catholic thought today, who is pro-choice. But these are all arch-conservative Roman Catholics. And I don't know if you saw the speech that Alito gave to, was it the Knights of Columbus now? To Notre Dame. It was a speech in Rome, making fun of the world's leaders, condemning his decision because of the harm it would create. And you could see in that speech that he is just, he considers himself, well, he was speaking as a Catholic, as an arch-conservative Catholic. It was a really eye-opening thing. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation did an amicus brief where we pointed out that the only real opposition, the only underlying opposition to abortion rights is religious in nature. It's people who think that they have a faith that life begins at conception, or they believe in ensoulment at conception, or they believe that pregnancy is God's will and humans can't tamper with it, and on and on. We gave a lot of documentation about what happened in the state of Mississippi and other states, where they even talked about God when they signed the anti-abortion bans and so on. I mean, it's overt. And, it's just very, very disheartening to see our nation go backwards like this and see basically minority rule. We have minority rule going on the Supreme Court, jeopardizing our individual rights. My mother used to say she felt it was a personal benefit to be free from religion personally, but it's an absolute necessity for government to be free from religion, and that we cannot protect any of our individual or human rights if we have religion controlling government, because whose religion? Who will be persecuted? Who will be favored? Who's the insider? Who's the outsider? And that's what we're starting to see. And we know that the sights are being set on same-sex marriage, the Obergefell decision, marriage equality. There's a big case going up to the Supreme Court on, I don't know if you followed, a woman who says she wants to start a website, but she'll get sued in Colorado because she doesn't want to do custom marriage websites for same-sex couples. And this is a bogus case that shouldn't have even been accepted. We've also seen the bogus case with Coach Kennedy this year, where the Supreme Court took a case they should never have accepted. The coach didn't even live anymore in the state where he was suing. You would normally be thrown out on standing immediately, as we've been thrown out a lot. And so that's sort of starting to unravel the very important school prayer precedent, protecting students from having religious rituals inflicted on them as part of the school day, where Coach Kennedy was saying, oh, I'm just praying on the 50-yard line. But actually, Sonia Sotomayor felt it was important to put in her dissent pictures of him praying with the students. It was false history that the Supreme Court accepted. And so that we have 75 years of very important Supreme Court precedent against religious indoctrination and rituals in our public schools, and that's going to be unraveling. There was also a very bad decision in Maine on vouchers, and so we continue to see tax money used to support religious education. And these particular schools in Maine would not allow LGBTQ students or teachers. They're allowed to discriminate, but still get public funding. Very dismaying developments. And so that's why we think it's so terribly important to have a public group that, talks about the necessity of separation between religion and government. And we think that the situation is kind of perilous, and we are very much in favor of court reform and court expansion, especially at the lower levels where we are very understaffed. There's no political need, no political argument there. We just need to get more judges. But if we don't do something about the Supreme Court, we are going to see 1 to 2 generations that will be suffering because we will be losing many of our liberties. And the midterm elections are very important. 2024 is very important. We're not a political group, but we can promote voting rights. And we have just done a major I'm Secular and I Vote campaign in every state, newspapers and billboards, where we have members of our organization be our spokespersons, and the importance of getting out the vote. I should say that our members are voters. We did a survey of them 2 years ago, and 98.8 or 99% are registered voters. Our members tend to be older, which is a surprise to many people, and older people do tend to be voters. But getting out the youth vote is a little bit harder. But there are more secular people today than there are religious right voters. The nuns, the NONES, are now 29% of the population. Atheists, agnostics, or nothing in particulars. We are now the largest denomination, quote unquote, by religious identification. There are more nuns than there are Roman Catholics or any other individual sect. There are more Protestants in general, but we're the largest denomination. So that is a huge change in our favor, but it is very hard to get the attention of public officials who want to wear religion on their sleeves. The last thing they want to do is lose votes if they're seen to be somehow not religious enough. There's still a de facto religious test for public office. And we do work closely with the Congressional Free Thought Caucus in DC that was started by Representative Jared Huffman from California and Representative Jamie Raskin from Maryland. And there are now 16 members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, and only Representative Huffman is out as an agnostic or calls himself a humanist or agnostic. The rest all belong nominally to some religion, but they are supportive of the rights of free thinkers and also the separation of church and state. So one of the things that we're doing there is working with Jamie Raskin, who introduced a resolution to put up a memorial to Thomas Paine in Washington, D.C., where he has no recognition, no memorial. He's our forgotten founder who probably named our nation, who we need to invoke again in our public policy, and was, a human rights advocate, bar none, opposed slavery, wrote The Age of Reason, wrote The Rights of Man. And yet, because he was a deist, because he did write The Age of Reason, that was a critique of revealed religions, he has been forgotten. So that's one of our major lobbying efforts in DC. And we have a lobbyist there, a full-time lobbyist that we work with. And we're about to start a C4 group. Like many C3 groups, we are realizing we have to do more lobbying and a little bit of electoral politics because things are getting kind of desperate. And a C3 group has to be very careful about the lobbying that it does. So we hope next year to get a lot more active on that front.
Annie Laurie, it's fascinating to me. And it just shows how powerful words are, that it really doesn't matter to the Freedom from Religion Foundation what religions people profess, only that religion is not part of government. My personal beliefs about abortion shouldn't dictate what laws are in place for other women.
That's right.
So yours is really yours. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is really a very personal kind of thing, a very individual commitment. Excuse me. He forgot that I was in a meeting. So anybody have questions or comments for Annie Laurie? Any questions that you're curious about how this all works? Because you've made it pretty clear, Annie Laurie. And can anybody identify the old Scottish ballad about Annie Laurie? Who did you tell me Annie Laurie showed up and sang it for you on television?
Yeah, we do have a TV show, and it airs in 13 cities, including Madison, Channel 11 or Channel 3, sorry, at 11 o'clock, unless there's football game minutes later. And in 2019, Ed Asner, Lou Grant, the guy from Up, was in town to do a benefit for the Progressive. And Amitabh Paul is our communications director that we inherited from the Progressive. He still knows folks there. And he said, would you like to interview Ed Asner? And I said, well, sure, but I don't know if we can get him. And sure enough, he agreed. His daughter is a very avid atheist. He's non-religious. And so it was a cold December, and they pulled up in the wrong part of the building and knocked on the door. And I didn't have my coat on, but she said, can you come and direct us the other way? And I ran into the car, into the back seat, and Ed Asner was in the front, and he said, who are you? And so I told him my name, and then he belted out, Max Wilton's Braves Are Bonnie. He started belting out the song. And it was really funny. He was singing the whole way to the other driveway. And then I said to him, would you do that during the interview? And he said, sure. So he did. So I asked him to sing it. It was very sweet. He was in his 90s, and that's probably the only people left who know the song, basically, or tend to be in their 80s or 90s. And that was fun. And we have had some very interesting guests. And next week, we get to interview John Irving, the novelist. And he is speaking at our convention, and he was supposed to speak in 2020. And of course, everything got put on hold. And it's a disappointment because he's 80 and his doctor won't let him fly. There's some kind of health issue. So we're going to have to do a remote. We're going to be in San Antonio, but he'll be doing it remotely. But when that happened, I said, people will be disappointed. How about we also get to interview you for our TV show? So last year at our convention, we gave an award to Gloria Steinem, and I got to interview her. It was remote because she had a fall just before she was supposed to come. But Margaret Atwood showed up in person.
Wow.
Really something. They both got our Forward Award, which is sort of based on the Forward statue and Wisconsin's motto. And it's sort of it's a statuette, sort of a modern woman with her arms raised. And so we've had a lot of interesting conversations and speakers. We're also interviewing, I don't know if you know if you're a Star Trek fan, the new version with Q, John Delancey is a member, he's a major member of FFRF, and we're going to be catching up with him on the TV show. And so it's been very interesting. 45 years at the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
You know, Annie Laura, you mentioned Margaret Atwood, and I have to tell you, I think the first example for many of us, certainly for myself, of what religious oversight in government could be imagined, could be what it could look like, was the book, The Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
Terrifying to read. And today, you know, we look around and we think, my goodness, it's unbelievable that something like that could actually happen. The other thing I want to comment on is the word nun, because it's N-O-N-S.
N-O-N-E-S. Yeah.
That's right, N-O-N-E-S. The people who are non-religious affiliated. So I got a kick out of that, because the first time you said it to me, I thought, nuns?
Yeah, you have to spell it.
Yeah, you do have to spell it. So somebody asked again, what day is your TV show on? Is it Sunday?
Yes, Sunday. It's 11 or thereafter. So
on Channel 3.
On Channel 3. So when there's, you know, tournaments and football games, you have to set your recording or whatever for another hour.
Right.
And then it's on in 12 other cities Sunday morning. It's only on at night here in Madison.
Okay.
And then it's on YouTube. You know, you can go to our YouTube FFRF YouTube channel, and they're all there. Like, there's 5 seasons of shows.
Good. Any other questions or comments that you'd like to make for Annie Laurie? Yes, Marcy.
I was just wondering if you have ever considered using the term secular a little more and teaching people what having a secular government means, and maybe that would be less, I don't know, it would make people, I don't know, I think
We do use the term all the time. I'm secular and I vote is our voting promotion. But unfortunately, many people do not know what secular means. And sometimes
right, but I think they need some education.
But when you're doing ads, it can be a problem. Sometimes they mix it up with sectarian. So you really,
okay.
But yes, we use it all the time. We use it in every single legal letter that we send out. We talk about secular government and define it. But it does have some drawbacks in terms of the public not understanding it. But it's a mainstay word for us.
Okay.
And we talk about secular people. You know, we're with you on that, and we're trying to educate. Uphill battle.
How can one donate to your organization?
Oh, it's so easy. You can just go to our website at ffrf.org, and there's a donate, or better yet, a join link. And it is deductible for income tax purposes, although that doesn't mean as much as it used to. But thank you for asking. I did want to comment about, go ahead.
Go ahead, Genevieve. You're muted, Jen.
No, I'm unmuted.
Oh,
is it for me? Okay, I just had
I just wonder if you have very many religious people involved in your organization. I grew up in a church that very firmly believed in the separation of church and state because we weren't supposed to pray with people who didn't believe exactly as we did. So we couldn't participate in the Boy Scouts. We couldn't go to baccalaureate. And so that was that's how I was raised, that to protect religion, there needs to be separation of church and state. Do you have any activity?
What sect was that? Is
The
that
Wisconsin Synod of the Lutheran Church.
okay? Well, because we have two purposes: to educate the public about free thought, non-theism, and to keep religion out of government. Somebody who is religious has to be pretty tolerant of that. But we have some, we have many Unitarian members because Unitarianism is creedless, Unitarian Universalism. And like I said, we've had sometimes we have parents of members join us. We've had a rabbi who is very liberal join us, and they just have to know that we're also the largest association of freethinkers. Just as religious people want to band together with people who believe as they do, there's the same right and same need by those of us who are not religious to espouse our views together. So there is another group, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, that exists in DC. They were started they used to be called Protestants United for Separation of Church and State. They started to oppose procreate education demands to support the Catholic Church. But then they've evolved into something that's just more of an umbrella group. And we work with them. We work with, we issued a joint report on Christian nationalism at the January 6th insurrection with the Baptist Joint Committee. FFRF and the Baptist Joint Committee produced that report together. And they also have an offshoot called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, which was way before January 6th. They were aware of this, and they have a petition that you can sign online. They're trying to get every Christian out there to sign up against this. And they do a great deal of education. And some of the other contributors to the report, well, they were largely academics and authors, but they included Anthea Butler, who's a professor in Pennsylvania, who wrote White Evangelical Racism. And she comes from the religious tradition. And then Professor Tisby, also from the Black Church, also was part of it. So we definitely need and have allies. And what has been very heartening, really, is that finally the media have discovered Christian nationalism. It's not just the Freedom from Religion Foundation talking about it, or some academics and authors, and it's also something that is now being understood and talked about. Right now, there's an awful lot of Christian nationalist candidates, of course, for public office. So we're delighted to see many more churches and religious people speaking out against Christian nationalism, and we need them to do so because it's an existential threat to our republic, our democracy, because they do not believe in democracy. They believe in a Christian theocracy. And they also believe that there should be privilege for the right kind of Christians. And that's what we're seeing, being agitated for. So we definitely have religious allies. We have taken lawsuits with religious people.
Yeah.
We have won lawsuits. We took a lawsuit with a minister here in Madison from the United Church of Christ over a unconstitutional law that was passed in the budget years ago that was going to give money to clergy to give religious counseling to people before they got married. And that church opposed that, and he opposed it, and he was our main plaintiff. When we sued over the 10 Commandments in La Crosse, we had Catholic, Lutheran, Episcopalian, Buddhist, atheist, Unitarian, you name it. We had 21 plaintiffs, and they were really diverse. So we do have definitely a need and love our religious allies.
Jean. Jean
I-
Rickard.
I
You have a-
think my question got answered because it was about where is the space for somebody that is personally religious or hopes to be, and but believes strongly that there should be that separation and religion has no place in government. So I think you answered my question.
Yeah, and also we do get some religious people who will just donate to our legal fund, which is, there's a drop down. So, you know, that's a way to support. But like I said, there are other groups out there to support. I did want to
No.
make, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jean.
The
Go
questions.
ahead, anyway. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, if somebody had a question, let's take that.
No, I think you answered everybody's questions. Oh, wait, Mary.
I don't have a question. I have a comment, and that is simply to say thank you for doing this work. It takes a great deal of courage to be on the front lines, and it takes more courage every day to be on the front lines on this issue. So thank you and your organization for standing out there. And I will be making my first donation today.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. Very sweet.
And
You know,
I
it's a
also want,
privilege, I think, to work for a nonprofit with this. You know, I think there's nothing more important than working for the First Amendment. So I think
Agreed.
I've had such a privilege to work for FFRF.
Nan.
I also wanted to say thank you. And you have been so articulate, and in your work, you have been so patient and clear in what your goals are. And I have to commend you for all you have done. And I will mention, I have seen the TV program more than once when I'm not a big TV watcher, but somehow I had I must have had the right channel on at 11 at night on Sunday. And it was like, oh, this is very interesting. And yes, you have been national for a long time, because I know I was walking on the boardwalk in Santa Monica, California, and all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, this is a freedom from religion. It was around the December holidays, and it was a display for freedom from religion. And I have a query, and that is, do you sense that you will ever be international? I know, I mean, you mentioned being aware of what's going on, but is that?
Well, we have our hands full with America. Also, because we work, you know, our attorneys are trained about our Constitution. The situation in Canada is so different. We have members from every province, but we don't so much get involved in their state church disputes. We have been a member of Humanists International. We aren't right now just because the price was a little steep, but we work with them. We do international work for what's called secular rescue, or I call it the Secular Underground Railroad, where we have given money to Humanists International, but we also give our money directly. Usually $50,000 to $60,000 a year is budgeted. And, you know, at the time of the, we're almost out of time. I don't know if you remember in 2015 when there was a spat of horrible killings in Bangladesh of bloggers, and Abhijit Roy was the first one to be killed, and he was an American citizen born in Bangladesh. And he and his wife were at a book fair, and he had written books about atheism and gay rights and evolution in Bangladesh. And he was targeted by imams in London, and they attacked him with machetes, and he died. And his wife, Bona, survived, lost her thumb. And, you know, she has grooves on her skull, but Bona recovered, and I've worked with her a lot. And we, people who are endangered, many of them were Bangladeshi, some of them are from Pakistan. Some of them get over into Sweden or the UK or the Netherlands, but they need some support. So we give stipends of $5,000. And some of them were really, after this spat of murders, anybody connected with Abhijit Roy was being killed. Some of them had to go into hiding in Tibet or Sri Lanka, really under terrible circumstances. So, it can be very unsafe to be a non-believer, especially if you're an apostate. If you were raised Muslim in an Islamist culture or country, you're not allowed to leave. And so that is something that we do on an international basis. We also work with ex-Muslims of the UK and other countries. They have a whole network, and we just co-sponsored an event in Cologne, Germany. People from 30 different countries, and we always learn so much. And Richard Dawkins was there, and it was right after Salman Rushdie was killed. And so we had a march to the town square, and that was very moving in support of him. So we do some things on an international level, but I don't know that the group itself will ever be international. At least I think we have, like I said, our hands full here.
Well, to put it in a very colloquial way, you certainly walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And it's an example, I think, for all of us, like all the subtle ways that I'm going to say we as women are restricted, but as believers in anything, your foundation gives everybody the right to their own personal belief.
Well,
It doesn't give us the right to have the government impose their beliefs on us or its beliefs on us. So it's very clear. I'm a nun now. I always wondered if I'd be a nun. Now I know I am. So,
well, thank you so much for listening patiently, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Annie Laurie, you've been a revelation to all of us, I'm sure. And I thank you for taking the time out of your really busy schedule to spend time with us. And I will look forward to continuing to know you and know about your foundations. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you around, Nan and others.
Well,